So, is music forbidden in Islam? It's a question you hear a lot, and honestly, there are a ton of different answers out there. In this explainer, we're going to break down one specific scholarly perspective to really understand the rules it sets out for music, singing, and even dancing. Let's get right into it.
Look, this is a seriously complex topic with so many diverse opinions all over the world. So it's really important to say this up front. For this explainer, we are zooming in on one specific scholarly viewpoint from our source material. The whole point is to understand its reasoning and the principles that guide it.
So, where do we even start with a topic this big? Well, we start with the baseline ruling. Think of this as the foundational answer given by the scholars in our source. Everything else we're going to talk about really builds from this one point.
Okay, so the starting point for this particular perspective is actually very direct and clear. Music that involves instruments is generally considered prohibited, or haram.
Now, this isn't just some arbitrary rule that was pulled out of thin air. It's a conclusion these scholars draw directly from the core religious texts, the Quran and the Sunnah. And from their perspective, this ruling is pretty comprehensive. It applies no matter the genre of music or what the artist's intention was.
But, of course, it's not quite that simple. While instrumental music has this general prohibition, what about singing? You know, the human voice? Well, here's where we start to find some very specific conditions and exceptions.
This viewpoint makes a really clear distinction. See, singing is considered permissible if it meets certain criteria. We're talking about singing without instruments, with the one exception being a simple hand drum called the daf. Also, the lyrics have to be decent, and it's for women in private gatherings of other women. On the flip side, it becomes impermissible when other instruments get involved, the lyrics are inappropriate, or it's happening in, unlawful mixed settings.
So, just to recap and make it super clear, for singing to be permissible within this framework, a specific checklist has to be met. It's got to be performed by women, only for other women, and on lawful occasions, like a wedding or Eid. It can be accompanied by that hand drum, the daf, but critically, the lyrics must always be decent and permissible.
All right, so that's singing. What about dancing? Well, the logic here actually follows a very similar path. The core principles, again, are all about the movement itself, modesty, and the intention behind it.
According to the source, dancing crosses over into the prohibited category if it involves certain things. This would include imitating the movements of the opposite gender, revealing parts of the body that should be covered, which is known as the aura, or involving any kind of immoral or seductive movements that are really designed to attract undue attention.
And just like we saw with singing, there's a very, very narrow exception. The source material suggests that some movement might be tolerated, but only if it's limited, modest, and it's happening among women in a totally private setting where none of those other prohibited elements are present.
And this brings us to a really important theme that you can see running through all of these rulings. The guidelines are often gender-specific. So let's take a closer look at exactly how these principles are applied differently to men and women. This table here really breaks it down for us. Let's just walk through it. First, when it comes to actually performing, singing is permitted for women, but only under those super strict conditions we already talked about. For men, it's generally discouraged. The same kind of principle applies to religious chants, or nasheeds. Now for listening, it's considered impermissible for men to listen to female singers, and this is based on the principle of avoiding fitna, which means temptation. And for women, the guidance is that they can't listen to male singers if there is any risk of that same temptation.
Okay, so up to this point, we've covered the what, the specific rules on music, singing, and dancing. But to really grasp this perspective, we have to understand the why. What are the core principles that are actually driving these scholarly interpretations?
It really all boils down to three foundational ideas. First, preserving modesty. That's a core tenet of Islamic ethics. Second, as this shield here suggests, it's about protecting the heart from temptation and any kind of moral harm. And third, the goal is to maintain a focus on the worship and remembrance of Allah, and avoiding things that are seen as a distraction from that central purpose.
And this leaves us with a final thought. Understanding this specific scholarly viewpoint really brings up a broader question, doesn't it? How do these timeless principles of faith and modesty intersect with our vast, ever-changing world of modern art and expression? It's a fascinating question to reflect on. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.